people do judge books and shows by their cover, by their title, by that one sentence blurb that we talk about it. Like, that's what people are making the decision of, like, do I take a closer look at this or not? And I think that that's where more attention should be paid, so that when we do go out and promote it, it should be obvious to people why this is valuable. And I think when we feel smarmy about promoting ourselves, it's because either we feel like we're pushing it on people who don't want it, which means either we have the wrong thing or we have the wrong people. If we actually found the right people who recognize that what we're bringing to them is a gift to them, then we're excited to promote it because we can see the positive reaction of when people hear about it.
Welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, where we get into the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenke, a podcast and media strategist, specializing in marketing and audience development.
And I'm John Kiernan. I'm a podcast producer, and we're asking the question that's on everyone's mind. Where is the money in podcasting?
Each week, we talk to podcast industry professionals, marketers, and creators who are turning podcasts into a thriving business and making the industry what it is today.
With real revenue, real strategies, and real results.
If you're looking to grow or scale your show, and of course monetize, you're in the right place.
So let's get down to PodBiz.
Today we're joined by Jeremy Enns, founder of the Podcast Marketing Academy. Jeremy, welcome to PodBiz.
Thank you so much for having me, Norma Jean. Excited to be here.
Well, let's get down to PodBiz. Where's the money in podcasting?
Okay, jumping right into the deep questions. Depending on, I think, how you look at it, one of the things that I think is fascinating about the podcast industry is that there is this quote unquote podcast industry. And then I think there's actually way more money that never gets accounted for that is actually in businesses that use podcasting to drive business. And so this is almost 100% who I work with. And there are lots and lots and lots of tiny, tiny shows that nobody will ever hear about that drive, 6-7 figures a year. And it's probably the podcast is one part of their marketing efforts. It's not entirely. But the thing that I hear again and again and again from coaches, consultants, service providers is that from their client list, a lot of times 80% of their clients will have listened to the podcast. And so it's like, and that's where they came from. And it's probably not where they discovered them, but the podcast, they discovered them elsewhere and then listened to the podcast as what I think of as a conversion accelerator, where it's like normally like my typical time to conversion before I started any podcasts about podcasting recently was something like 12 to 18 months for a client to sign up for me. And that was even once they joined my email list, which was as far as I track. So they might have followed me on social even longer. So let's just say 2 years. And then once I started the podcast, I'd started getting messages and get on sales calls with people who clearly binged through my shows, none of which are actually ongoing shows either. They're seasonal. And by the end of that, a couple weeks later, there was like, okay, let's get on a call and let's talk about this. And so I actually think that most of the money in podcasting is probably, we can call it like dark social. It's like dark podcasting money that it doesn't show up because it's not even really a part of the podcast industry. Most of those people don't even think of themselves as podcasters. They just happen to use a podcast to market their business.
Absolutely. I think that branded podcasting is really where we're seeing a lot of monetization. I mean, I love talking about ads. We have lots of ad folks who've come on, who are coming on. If you love ads, there are more ads episodes coming. And also, a lot of companies that are seeing the benefits of podcasting are really seeing the ROI. It's incredible in terms of that conversion accelerator, like you mentioned, not only in terms of new products, not only in terms of the values of the brand, but also connecting with that brand, right? Feeling like, oh, hey, I'm actually part of this community and I like what they have to say. And I like, that they're putting their money where their mouth is. I think that that's a really important one as well. And it keeps people engaged for longer than social media, for longer than they'll read your newsletter.
Yeah. And then, there's this other interesting side that a lot of people I work with also do advertising. So they're actually on both sides of this equation.
Yeah,
and
of course.
Like all of them that I know, their sales of their products and services vastly outpace, even if they have like solid sponsorship income. Like a lot of them might make like 50 to 100K a year for like a small business is like pretty good from sponsorships.
Yeah.
And then they earn much, much more from that from products and services. And then there's even these weird like hybrid, like I don't even like to call it advertising anymore. You move into like partnership and collaborations and sponsors. Who knows where that falls in that? Like these words all are distinct, and I think there should be more nuance in how they're used. A lot of like creators just say, I need to get sponsors. What they often are talking about is advertisers I think. But I think there's a lot of different ways to blend on that spectrum of like, how are you partnering with people? And I have a friend who he's got a pretty successful, it's a very successful podcast in his niche. It's probably one of the biggest in the niche. Decent sized niche, not a huge show by podcast standards, but solid. He does YouTube where he has a solid audience, and he does audio, which I think in his case, they're quite equal in terms of plays, which is coming more and more common that I'm seeing. But he actually started this really interesting type of partnership offer where part of it was cash paid to be, I think he had like 4 or 5 or maybe 6 advertising slots. They were all a year long, and he only had 5 of those. He sold them at the start of the year, filled them up. But as part of them, there was an option to pay in cash or to pay with equity. And I thought, oh, I've never heard of sponsorships being based on equity in the company before. And these are like early stage tech startups a lot of times. My friend, he's got the distribution that all of them want. And all of them kind of like, it's a huge accelerator for them.
Yeah.
My friend is one of the most preeminent people in his space. And it's a pretty small, well-networked space. And so it's like, that's actually a really interesting deal. And eventually he actually moved in to become a co-founder in one of those companies, which is just becoming a big part of his job. And so how do you calculate where the money is flowing to that? Like to him, there's probably, in the best case scenario, he's a co-founder of this tech startup that I think seems like there's big potential. Like that could be, you know, I mean, realistically, tens of millions of dollars.
If anyone
from
wants
his
to give us equity here at Podbiz, we are more than ready. If anybody wants a podcast monetization vertical to partner with, we'll take equity. Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting to see how people get scrappy and inventive in terms of barter and monetization exchange. It's definitely very interesting. I mean, you know, there's the classic impression exchange as well. You've seen people like, I have 50,000, they have 10,000, you know, I'll play one of their ads for every 5 of mine, that kind of thing. But I also think that podcasting is such a new medium. It inspires a lot of creativity in ways that we don't necessarily know. And, you know, that growth for a lot of people, I want to talk with you next about growth because that's really both of our jams. And you've been at it for quite a long time and really built a fantastic business around podcast growth. So, you know, I think it's interesting in terms of maximizing your niche, right? Absolutely. And a lot of the money that we know exists in podcasting really is invisible because it's not staying in podcasting. It's not like, hey, I'm Alex Cooper, right? Here's my big serious contract, right? It's, hey, actually, I own a small business. I've, you know, funneled 6 figures of business to it through this podcast vertical. I work with clients to do that a lot. And it's definitely something where, you know, people aren't bragging like, oh, my podcast made, you know, 6 figures. They're going on LinkedIn and they're saying, hey, my business broke 6 figures. And so you're not necessarily seeing the direct results of podcasting, or at least, you know, we on the industry side aren't seeing that. And then also, I do really want to highlight what you said about podcasting playing into a larger media strategy. I talk to clients about this all the time, right? Your podcast is going to create social clips for you. It's going to be the blueprint for LinkedIn articles, blog posts, newsletters. And so really having that coordinated multifaceted media strategy with your podcast driving that content has proven very successful for a lot of businesses.
Yeah. And, you know, the other thing that going back to this kind of like scrappy creative ideas around partnerships, collaborations, and not advertising to some extent, I think a lot of the people who are coming at podcasting who don't consider them podcasters and don't consider themselves part of the podcast industry, I like personally, I'm in a weird relation. Like, I don't think of myself as a podcaster, and I don't think of myself as as in the podcast industry. I think of myself as a writer and a marketer. Is like that's how I think of myself, and an entrepreneur. And I happen to use podcasting, and my niche happens to be podcasting. And it's like I stumbled into these things unintentionally, and kind of have just become obsessed with just because I'm a curious person.
Yeah,
but like
it's
you know, like
very interesting how we're seeing the split between people who are really about, you know, the true artistry of the medium and people who are like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur and I love this tool and I love the community around this tool. It's a very interesting balance of people.
Well, so this is what's interesting, and maybe this takes us into the marketing conversation, is because I actually don't think, I mean, there's a split, but I think that the split is becoming, if you approach it as a split, you will almost certainly fail at both. And I think the people who will succeed in the future, like like I don't consider myself a podcaster, but I consider myself an artist. And so any podcast I create is going to be well thought out. There's going to be a clear concept. It is going to be strategically produced to align with my business, but also it is going to be a kind of like place to funnel my creative energy, like, and bring the best of it to it. And being an artist and a creative person, I can't help myself but create something great. And you know, I am a sound engineer and audio producer, and so like I want to make beautiful sounding things, and I care about that. And I think that there is on the business side, there was a gold rush in podcasting where you didn't need to bring any craft to the medium and you could succeed. I think that's done. And I think that businesses that are getting into it, and that's everyone from solopreneurs up to brands, like need to take the craft of podcasting seriously if it is going to pay off as a business tool.
Yes.
And then I think that on the flip side, there's like the people who are pure artists who are approaching podcasting from an artistry standpoint. Either you have to set your expectations that this is not going to make money if I just create the thing I want to create, or it's luck, or I need to approach this as I need to find a way to channel my art into a show that has business potential. And how am I going to do that? And then you start getting into research of like, is there a viable audience for the show? Yada, yada, yada. We can go on.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, I think we've all seen people who really come from that audio side who are just super dedicated to the craft. And you're like, great. So like, what are your, you know, main features and benefits to sell this? And they're like, you know, or they have a salesperson, right? Or, you know, they're working on a production team and they're not necessarily, you know, wearing that entrepreneur hat. But we're seeing it more and more, you know, for people that go out on their own shingle, that it's so important to have that business mindset as well. How is this marketable? Who wants to hear this?
Yeah.
And
I think that.
Oh, no,
Well,
you go.
Yeah. Like, one of the things that I hear a lot from, this is specifically true of journalists and people in news and humanitarian kind of fields, is the thing is like, well, people need to hear this. And there's a lot of things that people need to hear that they don't want to hear. They will actively avoid it, and they will put up blockages, and they're like, oh yeah, I don't want to look at that thing because that makes me feel bad. And so it's about, how do we bridge that? How do we tell people the things they need to hear in an attractive package to them that aligns with what they're already interested in? And a lot of times that is a very meaningful shift, but it actually doesn't change the content itself all that much. And I think that's part of, I think when creatives don't like marketing, this is marketing. It's like, it's fun. This is the fun part. It's being creative about like, how do we sneak something in that people need that they're not even going to realize it? I was just thinking about a show this morning. So I'm creating a new show. It's going to be called Killer Concept. And in every episode, I'm going to basically dream up a new concept from scratch and talk the whole marketing, monetization, episode structure, content strategy, basically all that stuff. I was thinking like, it would be such a fun challenge to, let's just say, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, you want more people to believe in what you believe. And so how fun a creative challenge would it be to say, okay, my goal is to create a show that appeals to whatever, hard right or hard left. Like, and so it's going to be a show that like gains traction there. But my goal over 100 episodes is to help people see my side of things slowly but surely and convert them over. And I don't know exactly how you do that, but it's a fun kind of creative challenge and kind of like design constraint. And I feel it feels like a little bit of an evil tool that like I kind of don't want somebody to create this, but I think about it and I'm like, that's an interesting and very like 1984 way to use media. But like there is, you know, something to it where it's like, yeah, this is part of what all podcasts is. It's like we take something that like we know is important to people that will help them hopefully help make the world better. And it's like we need to find a way to package that in a way that appeals to them and then gets them in the door. And, you know, then we can kind of do our thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that marketing piece is very tricky emotionally for people who are attached to the craft of, you know, their art or their work, because self-promotion is something that a lot of creatives weren't taught, right? It was, oh, your work should stand alone, and it's, you know, kind of smarmy or, you know, self-aggrandizing to tell people about it. But it's not actually. And in the world of people's short attention spans, how are people going to know about your best podcast ever if you don't tell them? Right. So I think that's a really important factor as well. And it can be fun, right? Coming at marketing with that curiosity of actually what is going to spark interest with our audience is super important. So, Jeremy, what's your secret sauce? How do you do it?
I mean, I think that this is one of the funny things about marketing as well, is that on the one hand, we hear all the time, like, you got to market your stuff because great work isn't going to sell itself, which is true to some extent. But then you can actually go back to the original. It's like, actually, if you package great work, it will grow itself. And especially in podcasting, if you package it correctly. And so this is kind of building on what we just talked about. Podcasting still primarily, we'll see what happens with algorithms and whatever, but still primarily grows by word of mouth. And I actually think that it's going to keep doing that because, like, I just think about all podcasting as a long form medium is very similar to how books grow. And a lot of times it's that you need like many people to tell you about a thing that it's good before you're willing to commit an hour to something. Because let's say you have room for 3 to 5 shows in your weekly feed, like something has to be perceived as better than all of those things you already know and like and have a good experience with for you to even give it one shot. And so it takes a lot of people saying like, oh, so-and-so mentioned this, and then so-and-so mentioned this, and then so-and-so mentioned this. And this is at least for me, how I listen to almost any new show. It's like, finally, I feel like, okay, fine. Everybody's telling me about this. Just like, shut up already. I'll give it a try. And then I fall in love and I'm like, okay, why did it take me a year and a half to listen to this show after people started telling me about it? And so I think podcasts do grow by word of mouth. And so great work does spread. But I think that the key to it is that it has to be packaged in a way that's appealing to people. And I think that that's where there's so much great work that doesn't appeal to something that people see and they get it and their curiosity is aroused and they're in the door. And I think that that's where it's that kind of people facing layer. It's the storefront kind of that we put up, that cover art often is not as good as it could be. The title is often not as clear or relevant or intriguing as it could be. And a lot of these, and the way we talk about our shows is also horrendous. And I'm as guilty of this as anybody. Like, that is actually, I think, so much of actually marketing our shows is getting those like first impressions, like the first things that people hear about it. People do judge books and shows by their cover, by their title, by that one sentence blurb that we talk about it. Like, that's what people are making the decision of, like, do I take a closer look at this or not? And I think that that's where more attention should be paid, so that when we do go out and promote it, it should be obvious to people why this is valuable. And I think when we feel smarmy about promoting ourselves, it's because either we feel like we're pushing it on people who don't want it, which means either we have the wrong thing or we have the wrong people. And so I think that that's often one of these other kind of points of disconnection, where sometimes if we actually found the right people who recognize that what we're bringing to them is a gift to them, then we're excited to promote it because we can see the positive reaction of when people hear about it. Whereas when we're pushing it on an audience that isn't interested, then it feels smarmy because it kind of is, because they don't actually want it, though the show may be great for a different audience.
Absolutely. It's really about that right fit, right? And I think a lot of people, you're right, they're not clear on the audience they want to reach, right? They're not clear on that audience avatar of, who is listening and why. And they're also really not clear on their pitch and the specific value proposition of their show. Yeah.
Yep.
And fun can also be part of that value proposition. I think, entertainment is really underrated, especially if we're talking about podcasting for business. People can be like, oh, well, it's fun. Like, no, you have to.
Yep.
Why are people going to want to listen? It's fun. They're going to learn something. It's interesting, right? I think it's really getting clear on the, like, here's why you want to listen. And if you're making the show right, you're going to be that evangelist for your own show because you're excited and you want to listen as well.
Yeah. And I think it's also like a great show concept instantly converts other people to be evangelists. And so the one that I've been telling everybody about recently is, it is a client and a friend of mine. So I am already biased on two fronts, but he's been working on the show idea for probably 4 years. He actually already has another successful show. His name is actually Sam Harris, but not that Sam Harris, which has caused all kinds of problems and confusions and negative reviews on his show.
Shout out to your client, the other Sam Harris.
Sam Webster Harris is his name, and he gets negative reviews on his old show because people thought it was like famous Sam Harris, and they're like, this guy's trying to impersonate him. Whatever. Side story there. So he has a current show called Growth Mindset Psychology, all about kind of using, psychological principles to live a better life, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So that show he's been doing a long time, very successful already. He's a full-time podcaster. He's been working on this new show, which is called How to Change the World. And it's essentially the history of human innovation over the past 5,000 years told chronologically. And it's
Wow.
basically going to be a 13-year project at his release cadence to go starting with like fire. And there's actually some earlier stuff that he sets the stage beforehand, and then working up through every innovation that moved humanity forward in a big way. And so this show concept, it's huge, it's ambitious. He got the name right, he got the cover art right. And I'm like, for people like me who are interested in curiosity and tech and design and innovation and all these things, like it's one of those shows that's just like, you can feel a little bit productive, even though it's like fun listening. And I think like shows like Freakonomics and
I really have to say, Jeremy, it is the feeling of productivity. Yeah, there are a lot of shows that myself and a lot of other people I know listen to because you feel productive. It's like you bought stationery. It's like it's September or August and you bought all the pencils for school, and it's the illusion of productivity. Absolutely. And there's so many shows that really get it right.
And like I've told and converted probably several dozen people to become listeners of that show so far. It's still very early days, but it just got featured in Apple in Australia and New Zealand. And I would almost guarantee it will get featured in the US and Canada and the UK where he's based. Like, it is a show that is so good, like on the inside, but also the packaging and the pitch. Yeah. It's just like I feel like this show will do 100,000 downloads an episode, and it's all because of the concept. And it's like a big ambitious thing that not everybody could do. Like, I would never want to read 5 to 10 books on a topic to do one episode, but Sam loves it, and he's like, he can't get enough of it. And so he's the right person for that show.
God bless people who want to read 5 books per episode. Absolutely. And I also, want to allude to the fact that what you're talking about is really a slow burn in terms of growth, right? He's not aiming for a flash in the pan. And when we talk about podcasting, especially with clients, on that branded side, whether it's small businesses, who are, doing something that directly talks about their business or the values around it, or, like a larger branded podcast, it's really an important thing to remember that, like, hey, actually, this is here to provide value to your audience, and it has to be exciting and listenable. And it can't be a flash in the pan.
Yep. And I think the other thing, so this is interesting because he works with advertisers for his other show. This show's very small right now, maybe like 500 to 1,000 downloads an episode.
It'll get bigger after this episode comes out.
And even like a month in, that's actually, really good for. But
absolutely.
The other thing is it's interesting that he's done his other show for 8 years. And when he started this show, one of the comments he made was like, oh, I realized there was another level to the craft that I could bring to a show that never showed up in that other show. And he writes probably 3 to 4 drafts of every episode. And it's intense work. And I think that when you look at, if your goal is, let's say, tens of thousands of downloads an episode and a big podcast-based business where the show is the product, I don't think people realize that this is the work that most creators actually do put into it. It's like multiple drafts. It's doing a lot of research. It's doing something that, other people find unappealing or isn't suited to their skill set.
Sound
you
design.
Love. And
absolutely. Right? Right. I think, when we talk about the craftsmanship of really beautiful audio, right? Like, previously I've spoken to folks, from BBC who've done series where 20 people touch one episode.
Yeah.
And so, that's like the top example, right, of like how beautiful can this get? Or, when you listen to an episode of Radiolab and it's like just a string of names in the credits. And, it really can be aspirational in that way. And also everyone can get there, right? I think that that's also a really important tenet. Well, Jeremy, I want to ask you next, how did you get into the podcasting industry? Yeah,
so I went to school for audio engineering and record production. And so I worked in studios for a couple of years after that. And at some point, I wanted to work in music. And at some point realized the music industry is not the most economically rewarding industry to be in, and it's a very taxing work-life balance industry as well. And so at the time I was interning at a studio when I was really thinking hard about this, and the people who were like moving up the ranks ahead of me were there 7 days a week. They would get there at 8 a.m. and they would leave at 4 a.m. and unpaid, all of it. And there was people who lived in their cars. It's technically not legal, but that's the way the industry often, at least 10, 15 years ago, still worked.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, that's not really the life I want. And I like music. And so I was kind of like, well, I'll still just produce albums on the side, but that'll be my like side hustle hobby. And so I kind of got out of that and then became a podcast listener a few years later, in I think 2014, and realized after listening to podcasts, I went down to like the online business and marketing rabbit hole. Cause really for me, I wanted to travel was my goal. And realized like, oh, I actually wanted to be a travel photographer at the time. At some point I was like, oh, with all my like editing podcasts as a sound engineer is like the simplest thing in the world. And I was like, oh, this is actually a faster way to have a location independent business. And so basically stumbled into that as a freelance editor, and then stumbled into building an agency. It took me like 3 years to know that I was building an agency. I didn't know what like the agency business model was. And eventually I heard somebody say it and I was like, oh, that's the type of business I have. And I was like, that's really helpful. Now I can Google like agency business strategy or whatever. And I already had a team of like 7 people or something. And I was just like, I don't know, I'm just like hiring people and putting out fires and doing everything. And then sometime 2019, when podcasting started getting harder, let's say, where you couldn't just start a show and it would grow, then my clients started asking like, okay, we launched, everything's great, show sounds good, getting good feedback, but we got like 50 downloads an episode. Like, how do we grow? And being a like classic artist and creative and having avoided marketing my whole life, I was like, ooh, I guess I better figure that out or I'm not going to have any clients anymore. And so just started doing a bunch of interviews with podcasters in the industry, my existing clients, the successful ones, unsuccessful ones. And that kind of just led to some like core kind of fundamentals, and kind of have just became obsessed with that ever since. And now the agency's shut down, and the marketing consulting and creating and writing about it is all I do.
Yeah, you are Podcast Marketing Academy. So, for everybody out there maybe who is an indie podcast or who may also be on the business side of podcasting, what would you say are, kind of the main tenets? I mean, because I could talk about this with you all day long, but, for you with Podcast Marketing Academy, obviously when we talk about podcast marketing, it's going to be different for every show, right? And people talk to me about this all the time. And I'm like, how long is a piece of string? How long should a podcast be? What should your podcast marketing look like? How long's a piece of string? That's that question to me, unless you have more specifics. But there are best practices. So, what are some trends that you've seen really make an impact in the last, I want to say 12 to 18 months?
Well, so I think like concept, like when you think about like developing a concept for a show, this has been something that we've known forever. I mean, TV's been based on this for, as long as TV's been around. It shows up in more and more in a lot of content online. And I think indie creators have been slow to adopt it. But I think like actually having a premise for your show that is not just an interview show about this topic, like that in every topic there are dozens of those shows. And so it's thinking about like, how can we explore this topic in a hooky way, and that provides a consistent frame and formula for every episode that is something that people can rely upon. And so like I mentioned the show before, killer concept. So basically the premise is every episode I start from scratch and I say, okay, here's a topic lots of people make shows about that are boring. 99% of shows on this topic are boring. Let's make an interesting one on the fly. And so that's like there's something there that you hear that and you're like, oh, I get what the show is. There's a formula. Every episode follows the same thing. And I can picture that this is not a show talking about podcast marketing or growth. It's taking a very specific aspect of it and saying like, oh, we're going to like show this through demonstration. And that's one type of concept. And like this show, part of the point of it is to illustrate that there's certainly concept archetypes, but there's many more concepts. Like there's infinite ways that you could explore a topic. And if your show is going to be successful, it has to have something hooky, something interesting that gets people to choose this one versus any of the other shows on your topic. And so that's really, I think, the first thing that is becoming more, I'm glad that people are waking up to it, because I think that's going to be the basically like required, kind of one of the required kind of components of any show to attract an audience in the future. So that's one of the things with businesses in particular. I mean, I don't think this is a trend, but I think part of developing your concept is about getting people to listen, but the other part is that your concept should be built around your core business point of view and IP. And I think almost nobody understands actual content strategy and thinks about like what you're actually trying to do with content. And people think, well, it's track people to my business. That's part of it. It's also to nurture people. That's a way too blunt and broad a way to talk about it. Really, the point of your content strategy is to build your ideal customer's chain of beliefs. This is like kind of classic marketing strategy. And so every customer has a set of things that they must believe in order for them to buy from you. And that's the job of your overall marketing and content, is to bring them in the door with something that's interesting and compelling to them. And then over time, build the required beliefs and realign the misaligned beliefs. And so now they're like, oh, I see that this business has a point of view about how to solve the problem that I'm facing. And they've kind of like discredited these other options that I was considering with logic and proof and all various kinds of other things. And they presented me this new way that sounds pretty compelling. And so now I'm bought into their methodology, and maybe I sign up for their product or service and maybe I don't, but I'm like, oh, this feels like the right way to solve the problem. I think that shift, like this is what content strategy is really about. And most people are throwing stuff at the wall without any kind of strategy other than like, well, people are interested in this, so I'm going to make stuff about that. Whereas like that probably doesn't align with your actual larger business strategy. And so I think this is really why so many businesses create podcasts that don't lead to clients and customers, is because they're just creating stuff that people might like to listen to, but it doesn't actually showcase them and their view and their perspective, not even as experts, but as people who have a solution to the problem and can wrap a compelling story around it and prove that. So that's, I think, the two big things is like, first, there's the concept related to getting people in. And then there's also this other angle of like, it needs to be a vehicle for your larger brand messaging, which most people don't know what their larger brand message is. And so that's another, big one as well. That is usually where we start when I work with people. It's getting clear on like, what's the brand point of view? What is the actual message? What are the things people need to believe? And a lot of times these are things that people are like, I could see why, I maybe should think about that.
Absolutely. And a lot of people who have businesses, very successful businesses, don't always think about that.
Yeah. Yep.
Another question that I often ask is like, what are your goals for your podcast? Right. And sometimes it'll be, to make money. I'm like, okay, great. But in what way? Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
definitely.
And like let's even like use, so I mentioned the show already, so we have some context there. So my strategy behind my show is twofold. For listeners, I want to show people, I want to build awareness that concept is the most important thing that you can do for your show. When it comes to marketing and to sales, it's like, if you don't get the concept right, everything is going to be harder downstream. And so I want to sell people on the fact that this is the best thing that you can do for your show. Care about this. For my business, the strategy is that I want to position myself as one of the best people in the world at coming up with podcast concepts. And I have a list of something like 300 or 400. Like, it's once I started the show, I'm like, I think I have a very unique skill in being able to come up with concepts and build them out and build a business case for them. And so that's my business strategy. It's not necessarily make money. It's saying I want to position myself in a very specific way that I think I am currently undervalued at in the market. And so I'm going to make a show that does that for me. And that's one small part of my larger marketing strategy. My newsletter focus on this a little bit, but not 100% on that. But this show is going to be the main event for that thing. And the newsletter is going to point people to that and so on. And so I think this is the other part where people don't think about like podcasts as doing very specific micro jobs in a larger system. And really, they should think about every content platform that way. Your newsletter, your podcast, your social media, even LinkedIn might do a different job than Instagram. It probably should, because people have different kind of platform psychology related to each of those platforms. Yeah. And so like, this is like, obviously I'm a nerd about all this, and I like thinking about the big picture system.
Here. I mean, this is the kind of stuff where I'm like, people are like, what do you do? I'm like, hold on. Let me make you a SWOT analysis. Give me 8 hours to deep dive on every outlet you have, do a full assessment and audit, and talk about where you are and where you want to go and how to get there and why you're not there now. Right. I think it's really important to talk about that gap as well. If you haven't started from day one, a lot of the time people call me when they've reached a plateau and they're like, ugh, and I'm like, okay, what am I dealing with here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is a really big one as well. And it's, what are all of your different outlets doing for your main business and the goals of your show, whether it's monetization or bringing in business and the values around your show. And also, what are all of your media what are all of your media outlets doing for each other, right? I think that's
Right.
yeah, which is very underutilized. And of course, it's like
Yeah.
baseline step one if you're on the marketing side. But for everybody out there who's like, oh, well, we have a newsletter, I'm like, okay, great. And did you plug this into it? And did you plug that in the newsletter? And I think it's one of those things where that cross promo is so important. And it's also
Mhm.
work, for a lot of people who haven't hired one of us. If you're an indie or a one-man band, that can feel really overwhelming as well.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing that I always like to point out is like, I definitely consider myself a marketer now, but I'm most at my core, I'm like a creative and an artist. And I
Yeah.
think the thing I didn't understand about marketing is that like marketing is the most all-encompassing, expansive, creative field, I think. Because like at least for me personally, like I am a writer. I like playing with video. I'm obviously an audio producer and podcaster. I like graphic design. I like building websites. All of these are like art projects. And I get to think about like, what's the universe I'm building and how do these like they're each like all of it is art, is like the
Yeah.
whole world of my brand.
And the
And it's like,
messaging of
that's
each
fun.
thing and that conversation and the copy, it all feeds into the overall tone of your show. It's not just the sound design, of your 20-person per episode podcast. It's, hey, how is that message being carried through like a thread through all of your communication and the community you create and all of your visuals and all of your copy and the overall feeling people get when they receive any communication from you, whether it's on a public platform or in their inbox, right? I think all of that is super
Mhm.
important to have that cohesion. Absolutely. Well, Jeremy, what would you say is one key move or metric or even a mindset that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career and also the success of your clients?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two things. I think I have some, I don't know, we're all unique in our mental programming and everything. I think for me, like I have basically always had just a sense of detachment from my work. And so I don't really care how well anything does. Like I care if people listen to my new shows. Like I check the stats, but it doesn't matter to me. Like I'm in the game of when this is actually ties into the second piece, which is like a bit of a long-term mindset. My framing for myself is that I look back on what I created 10 years ago and I think, wow, I've come a long way. And then I think, man, imagine when I'm 60, like this stuff I'm doing now is going to be nothing. And so I'm kind of just like, I'm in prep mode for when I'm like 30 years from now. Like that's the mindset that I like, honestly, and just like, that's my default, I think. Is just kind of like, I remember being a kid and I was like, I can't wait till I'm like 35. I was like, I think I'm going to be really in my prime when I get into my mid 30s, probably.
Yeah, totally.
And then, and I was always like a little bit envious of my future self of like having more skills and more experience. And I really think about that now where I'm just like, this is still just such a warm up that like that Seth Godin has this saying about like the job of a creator and artist is basically just getting on base, and it's like staying in the game. The game is staying in the game while you build your skills, and it's like scrape by, get another round in, and like eventually you start to build momentum. And so I think for me, there is one of my coaches talks a lot about in marketing and branding the idea of non-neediness. And so like not needing people to like your stuff, not needing people to get it, not needing people to buy it. And I think the less pressure that you have on all of those things, the more you can play the long game. And I just think about like friends and peers who always seem to be struggling. It's the fact that they're always struggling makes their marketing feel needier. It makes it feel like it just makes you want to take a step back and you're a little bit like, I don't quite want to engage with that. Whereas when you have that sense of detachment, I think, and this actually plays into the other piece that I think is really important. Like I am just, I think, really myself in my content, and I wasn't always, but I think the more long-term of a vision I took, the less I compared myself to other people, the less I felt like I needed to conform to best practices. And I was just like, I have good intuition. I've been creating stuff for 2 decades, and like I trust that now. And it's interesting. Like I sent out a cover art concept this morning to my email list, and I've showed it to a few people in the past 2 days, and it's been like kind of like mediocre or somewhat negative feedback, and I have pretty high conviction that it's actually right. And so I'm a little bit like, I think I trust myself more than all these people who are telling me I'm wrong, because that has routinely been the case.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't have the insight of what I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to position it, and what the research that I've done on what else is out there, the decades of design experience and podcast experience and marketing and all these things. And so I'm looking at these things, and there's specific things that are standing out that people are saying. But overall, I can kind of look at these and be like, okay, they don't get it. And that's fine. And so I think that that's something that eventually, like, the people who are successful break away. They learn the best practices. I mean, this is just cliche, generic advice.
Absolutely. No, I've heard.
They do their thing.
I've heard this trait that was attributed to Steve Jobs about, and a lot of founders in tech, about successful founders have a high level of disagreeableness, right? At some point, you have to know you're right and have that self-trust. Absolutely. Well, Jeremy, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
So a lot of people do know, like, I'm known for podcast marketing, but like, I think my strongest skill is as a writer, and I do get that feedback a lot. But I think also, like, especially as an email copywriter, I think that that's something that I am probably just as skilled, if not more, in email marketing than podcasting, because like that's actually the core of my business. And I write a daily newsletter.
Oh yeah.
I write probably 4 hours a day. I like think most strategically about email, probably because it really is the hub of my business. And so I actually work with that with most of my clients on their email marketing, but I don't think really people see me as that. And then I think the other side is also as like course and product development, is I've done so much of that like those two skills, I'm probably like all equal with podcasting and podcast marketing. It's just that my like positioning at this point and niche happens to be podcasting.
Absolutely. And you have a fantastic newsletter. Tell us about your newsletter strategy.
Thank you. So, the newsletter strategy is, I mean, we could talk for another hour about this, but I talked before about like content strategy as a whole. So I think a lot about like what are the things that I'm uniquely positioned to offer to people. And I think that those two things are concept development. I have a unique skill there, and then large, big picture strategy. And that actually ties into email marketing, product development, brand development, and podcasting. And so really where I'm most useful to people is in people who have all those pieces that they've probably developed in silos, and they've got to a plateau where their business is really working well, but they're like, there's so much wasted potential here, and I don't know how to make all this stuff work. And so those are my favorite clients, where I'm like, oh man, look at all this stuff we get to play with. We get to play with email marketing. We get to build welcome sequences. We get to design a new newsletter strategy and tie that into the podcast and all this stuff. And so like that's where in thinking about my email strategy, it's both a heavy emphasis on concept development, and it's also a heavy emphasis on strategy, not tactics. And so I think most podcast marketing advice focuses on tactics. And I know so many people who've done all the tactics and they've never worked. And the reason is because their show content isn't inherently attractive. And so they get it in front of thousands, tens of thousands of people, and people aren't coming back to it. And it's like, well, the only real reason that could be is because people don't see this as interesting or valuable. And so either your messaging is off, your packaging is off, or the show concept is just not inherently interesting. So let's focus on those things, and then we'll go back out with the promotion and the tactics. And so that's where I kind of want to counter position against people. It's a bit of a like take for a savvier, I think, audience who's already done a lot of the things. My typical like clients are probably podcasting 3 years generally. Like they've been doing it a while. They've already been consistent. So that's a big part of my newsletter strategy, is focusing on the things that I want to work people around, and changing those beliefs, and like just proving time and time and time again, like why these things matter to focus on, even though most people don't believe that. And so my goal is like wearing you down over time to adopting the mindset that will actually get you the thing you want, and saying like, okay, I've ignored this for 2 years. I've tried everything else. It still isn't working. Maybe Jeremy has a point. Like, let's either, do this thing on my own, or take one of his workshops, or sign up to work with him, or whatnot.
I love it. It's Jeremy's marketing world. We are just living in it. Well, Jeremy, if you had to start over again today, what would you do differently to grow faster or smarter?
I don't even know. So one of my beliefs is that like, I don't think you actually can. Like, I think mistakes are essential. I think you can't actually learn the right way until you've done the wrong way. And so I kind of think it's not, and I wonder about this as an educator. A lot of times I'm like, is it possible for me to actually help someone if they haven't done the wrong thing first? And I think there are some people who it's possible, or they've made similar mistakes in other fields or whatnot. But I don't think I actually could have grown any faster. I think that building a business and a show there is so much to it. Like I dedicated like 1 full year was really like, I'm focused on exposure this year. And then that didn't really get me as much as I wanted. And I realized like, oh, the problem is going back to that idea of attractiveness. I was like, I don't have enough attractive on-ramps into my world. And so the next year I focused on building out all these assets that were more attractive. The next year was then, okay, now I have this audience, but my sales are underperforming. Now I got to figure out this thing. And I think that people think you can figure all that out in like 3 months or maybe even a year. And really it's like, building a business is like your life's work, like, and it's never done. And so I think that that's kind of like everything takes so much longer because you still got to, keep the business running in the meantime. So I don't know if there's anything that I would have done. I think I would have paid more attention to the attractiveness of the things I was out there, really understanding like I need to position these as things that people want to consume that have strong hooks to them. That would have certainly made that year I dedicated to exposure a lot more effective than it was. But other than that, it was kind of almost the sequencing of things that I focused on.
Absolutely. And last question we ask everybody here on PodBiz, what are you most excited about coming up within the podcasting industry?
Oof, this is another tough question, actually. I this is like, I don't know that there's anything. I'm not excited. I think, like I said before, I see myself as like detached from the podcast industry. I happen to kind of like orbit it somehow.
That's
and
fair.
I don't care. I'm like myself and my clients will be fine, whatever happens to the podcast industry. And so I'm kind of like, I don't know. I work with a lot of a handful of people who are like shows that are firmly a part of the podcast industry. I would be much more worried if I was those people, or I'd be excited about, potential about video and stuff. But I kind of feel like I'm an artist and creative and I will use whatever mediums exist and I will have fun doing so and I will make them work. And I kind of like things come and go. Nothing lasts forever. And I think that kind of like sense of detachment firmly
absolutely. We've had other entrepreneurs on the show really speak about the value of that sense of kind of riding the wave and knowing that, when you have your own business, that's really how it is to be kind and do your best. Well, Jeremy Enns, founder of Podcast Marketing Academy, thank you so much for joining us here on PodBiz.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Norma Jean.